Here he is from Pittsburgh, the Steel City, which actually has a pretty decent, vibrant scene downtown. It's Patrick Johnston of the Province and Post Media, back here with Sekeres and Price in 2023. How you doing?
Hello, PJ.
I'm good, indeed. I was talking with my cabbie yesterday, and we were discussing what a great sports town this. I mean, it is. It's obvious. We know that. But yeah, downtown's nice. Was over at City Works Brew Pub, which has got lots of beers and good greasy food for people who like greasy food.
There's a lot of that in Pittsburgh, too.
In fact, it's got so many sports teams that Jim Rutherford said in that article that it allows it to spread out sort of the magnifying glass on each team as opposed to where he now manages.
Come on, please. It's a Steelers town and then everything else. Much like we're a Canucks town and everything else. Did you catch JR in the Trib, the feature-length interview?
Yeah. Yeah.
Boy, there's a lot of enthusiasm there, PJ, for that article. yeah.
Are you like me? Like, wait a second, you're ducking Vancouver media and season ticket holder events. You're doing feature-length interviews for a Pittsburgh newspaper?
I listen, Seth Robar is a good reporter. I get along with him well. I was pleased. Let's just say I was pleased that he was able to get an interview with Jim Rutherford about how things are going in Vancouver, because it's very much the kind of questions that I had for him. So. Yeah, no, it was insightful. I mean, I'm glad he confirmed what I had long suspected, which is that he didn't quite realize how knotted the cap situation was here. The focus on the team. I mean, there's also been a lot of things that have happened in the 10 years since they were in the Stanley Cup final. It is a complicated, challenging situation here, as we well know. And, people just want to see that there's forward progress. And that's been I think in general, people have had the past year certainly, opened with some promise that maybe there was change in the offing. But as we've seen, they stuck with it, and the team hasn't been very good, and people are tired of the team not being very good, and nothing seemingly positive happening off the ice.
Is this a big week for the Canucks? Me and Matt were just talking away from the microphones about the out-of-town scoreboard each and every night, which just seems to go against them. I mean, getting a top three in the division, I mean, if it wasn't already mathematically unfeasible, it certainly is now. So it's all about the wild cards for the rest of the conference, and that seems pretty untenable now as well. So considering there's some team meetings internally happening, and of course, you could try to get ahead of the trade deadline as early as now. Are we inside a fortnight where maybe the Canucks' future fortunes are laid out a little bit more clearly?
Well, without a doubt. As we've seen, the management is casting a wide net. Rutherford was on the trip, but has moved on from Pittsburgh already. He's gone to Florida to get in there early because scouting meetings are ongoing, or certainly about to start. Patrick Allvin was at the World Juniors with Scott Young, and has carried on with his scouting. We understand was in Boston, for instance, on Saturday watching Northeastern play, and to see Jackson Dorrington and of course Aidan McDonough. There's a lot happening. They're building their list. I mean, that was something I came away with talking to Scott Young on Friday when I talked to him just a bit about the two Swedes anyway that they had at the World Juniors. They're certainly building a list, and they know they need to keep finding new young players because they don't have a lot of new young players otherwise. Again, as I think we've said sort of on repeat, and I said 2 minutes ago, the past year has been a lot of talk about needing to set a new course and find new younger players. And 4 games here on the road with tough opponents in each stop, even Florida perhaps on Saturday, who aren't having a very good year, and it's kind of astounding to see how they essentially blew up what was a President's Trophy team and one of the best teams in the league, and fired the coach and made some very weird additions. And Bill Zito doesn't have a first-round draft pick for the next 3-4 years. But even the Panthers are still have a strong bunch of players, and all 4 of these games are going to be hard. And the Canucks are 8 points out of a wild card spot. Yeah, of course, it has to be a big fortnight, as you put it. There has to be change coming.
Well, they're 1-4 in this. Everyone looked at this 12-game stretch and said all these playoff teams and this road trip through back east is going to be tough. They're 1-4 through the first 5 games of this 12-game segment, and as mentioned, 8 back now, 4 teams to jump, and the Pacific Division teams, at least Seattle and LA, look gone, long gone. We're talking about trades here. Let's ask you the Bodog poll question. Cringiest destination for a Bo Horvat trade, whether that's Boston, Toronto, Seattle, the Alberta teams, or feel free to go off the board, Patrick. Of course, just about anywhere Bo Horvat is traded is going to be tough to stomach for Canucks fans. Patrick, do you think he could put Toronto or one of the Alberta teams over the top?
Yeah, I do. I think with the progress he's shown in his game offensively, all the work he's put in with Adam Oates, this incredible shot that he now has off the wing, his sort of improved understanding, I guess is the best way to put it, of how to find space, in the slot. Like, it's not just you stand on top of the crease, but this is a point I tried to make before Christmas when we first started noticing these things. But that he essentially moves himself away from the defenseman into a sort of a bit of a no man's land for defenders, where he finds some space to actually get a stick loose and on pucks that are coming in from the point. He's been so effective in those regards. And then, he's not an elite shutdown center by any stretch of the imagination, but he has improved himself in that regard as well. Obviously there are moments where, like just about every other Canuck, he has found himself looking a bit lost defensively. But he's too good a player. He's too smart a player for him to really be an issue, I would say, on a better team. Even if it were an issue on any team, even on this team, which, if the team were any better, I don't think we would talk about it. But yeah, he's a guy that's, he's a second line center, producing at an incredible rate. And you look at the best teams, and certainly, without talking about the re-signing issue, just looking in the vacuum, the best teams are always looking to add, a third guy who really is, a second line center, but you're deploying as your third center. And you look at how the best teams are set up, other than perhaps Colorado, he would be that kind of guy. So yeah, I feel like he is a guy that puts another team over the top. Absolutely.
Speaking of trades, JT Miller is his de facto hometown in Pittsburgh, right, Eastern Ohio.
You want to do a trade proposal,
Do you think he's available for the right price, or do you think they're rooted in JT Miller as a part of this team's future?
I don't think they're rooted in him. Obviously they made a choice, right? That is clear. It's also clear to me that if they'd wanted to, they could have probably made a choice earlier in the year with Horvat. Now, were they trying to do both? That's something I found myself wondering, because we know that they have long wanted to try to get out from under the Myers deal and certainly the OEL deal. Both are immensely difficult things to do. So yeah, I still at the end of the day, they clearly like the player. They like what he brings to the table. He is a very good winger. He's a very, that mustn't be lost in all this, is that when he's deployed to his advantage, he's outstanding, and he's remained so. It's when he's asked to do something that he wants to be, but clearly is not, which is a two-way center, that he's struggled. And in the end, also, this is a management group that is ready to move on from Bruce Boudreau, but we're clearly, I think, going to stick through the season unless something goes drastically south. I think that this is the coaching staff through the end of the season, so they're going to, there would also be, their argument would be, well, listen, we haven't seen him with a different coach. We think he would do very well with a different coach. But anything's possible. I just don't think, as Larry Brooks noted in his column on the weekend, what other teams will have seen in recent weeks from Miller was all the things that worried them last year when trade discussions were perhaps happening. He's a volatile player. He plays, to his credit, plays with his heart on his sleeve, but also to, obviously his detriment, because he is guilty of losing focus. I would say, because of that passion, and certainly his coach has talked about it. There'll be times when he tries to do too much, and there's other players that are similarly good. He's not a superstar, but he's a very good player, but who don't have as much baggage with them, I guess, whether that's fair or otherwise. And I think what we've seen is a player that is frustrated by losing, no doubt, but that was always a thing that teams were worried about him, and they've seen that quite clearly in the last few weeks.
Which of the three Thatcher Demko storylines do you think is most probable? They rush him back to try to salvage the season. They keep him out because they know that it doesn't matter. Or he just comes back when he's ready, but they're not going to make a judgment on their season until they've let him try to win their way back into contention here. Which is the most probable here?
Well, we saw him on the ice this morning, and most definitely he's not. I mean, Bruce Boudreau sort of said, well, if he's taking pucks, that's great, but he wasn't taking pucks. He's working on his mobility, getting himself back physically ready to play the position. I don't get the sense there's any rush. There is a chance to work with the goalie coach and travel with the team on the road, but he wasn't in practice yesterday. He got on the ice afterwards. It was a very light morning skate, essentially, give Colin Dealey a bit of a warm up, and I wonder perhaps if Ethan Bear's dealing with something, because Boudreau made a reference to a couple of guys being sort of, essentially game time decisions in terms of their health. So yeah, I don't think he's certainly not playing this week. I can tell you that much. Bruce said that very clearly today, and you can just see what he's doing. The odds of him playing after not taking a puck in that position, by the weekend it's not happening. Could he play at the end of next week? Sure, but then of course they're off. And in the end, the timeline that Boudreau gave us right after Christmas, that he didn't think likely he was going to be back until early February because they had the All-Star break. I think in the end, realistically, it seems most likely. Although, like I said, anything's possible. Maybe he gets in late the end of next week. But by the end of next week, this playoff chase is, I think, almost certainly going to be done. So the discussion totally changes at that point.
Is there any possibility of Artur's Silovs playing a Canucks game here? A Vancouver Canucks game? He's been much better in Abbey. The two guys they're playing have not been very good.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Spencer Martin obviously came into the season. They wanted him to be able to give them enough. But what that was supposed to be was, 20-some starts, 25 starts. We're obviously going to be well past that by the time the season's well and done, and it's been a struggle for him a lot of the nights recently. But that's also because the defense in front of him hasn't been very good. Could he be a competent NHL goalie with a reasonable defense? I absolutely think so. So from that standpoint, I'm not sure throwing, essentially your main goalie prospect into the cauldron, as you will, at this point really makes any sense. You think about, we've seen the dog games that you get in March and April, and I'm not sure that's the kind of thing you want to give your goalie. I mean, yeah, sure, they could see him, I suppose. But I don't think that's terribly likely, just given how they've set their lineup up and what they're looking for. They need Thatcher Demko in the end to play most of the games. Once he's healthy, they need him to get back into form. They need him to play. They need him to find his way. And that's kind of everything at this point.
You're quite right. It's got to be one of the big pursuits in the second half to make sure that Thatcher Demko is still the franchise goalie you thought him to be. To quote Denny Green, they are who we thought they were. Yeah. Wonderful stuff. Enjoy yourself in Pittsburgh, and we will catch up next week. Patrick.
Marvelous, fellas. Always a pleasure.